Hello friends, thank you for choosing to hang out with me once again. This week we're covering another suggestion, this time from viewer Somebody's Grandma. Our case is about a young 13-year-old girl who unfortunately became a victim of an online catfish that resulted in the worst possible outcome. Kacie Woody was a bright, intelligent child, but too trusting of those she considered friends. We want to spread awareness, so I'm going to link resources in the description of the video about online safety, so if you need that information, it will be there. As always, I invite you to join me as we remember Kacie Woody. Kacie Renee Woody was born on October 17, 1989 in Little Rock, Arkansas, to parents Christy and Ricky Woody. Kacie was the third and youngest of the Woody's children. She also had two older brothers named Austin and Timothy who adored their sister. Early on, Kacie was faced with some tough challenges. At birth, she was diagnosed with meconium aspiration syndrome. This condition occurs when an infant aspirated a mixture of meconium and amniotic fluid into the lungs at the time of birth. It can lead to severe illness or even death, but Kacie was a fighter. After several weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit, she recovered and cleared to go home. Kacie grew up in the city of Holland, Arkansas. Holland was very small, holding a population of less than 600 residents. The Woody family lived on a quiet but rural street in a quaint house that was enough for them. However, tragedy struck when Kacie was only 7 years old. In 1997, on the way home from her brother Tim's baseball game, the Woody family had an accident. While Ricky was driving the car, horses ran out onto the road, and before he could stop, it was too late. The impact resulted in Christy's death. Allegedly, Kacie gained a hatred for horses, since they were the reason her mother was gone. Kacie rarely talked about the event with anyone. She always spoke fondly of her mother, believing she was an angel now and had hopes of seeing her again in heaven. Kacie grew up to be a bright and caring person. She was described as shy amongst those she didn't know, but when she got comfortable, she was quite the opposite. She attended Greenbrier Middle School, where she discovered her passion for singing and the saxophone. She joined the choir to hone her skill and wrote poetry in her spare time. Kacie was well known by peers since, much like them, she had been part of the school system since kindergarten, and her two older brothers were star athletes. She seemed to be more mature compared to her other 12-year-old classmates. Kacie was responsible according to her father. Ricky was a police officer, which resulted in at times very late shifts, which left Kacie to take care of herself. She did her own laundry, cooked dinner, and completed schoolwork without parental pressures. Although Rick spent long periods of time out of the home, Kacie wasn't always alone. Her brother Tim and his friend Eric were both staying at the Woody home since they were attending college at the University of Central Arkansas in Conway. And on the nights when Kacie would be at home by herself, Rick felt comfortable knowing that her maternal aunt Teresa lived just next door. As previously mentioned, the Woody home was located in a very rural area, which meant phone calls were considered long distance, which could get expensive quickly, especially with a young teen at home. So Rick had to play strict rules regarding phone use and instead provided an alternative, the internet. Growing up in the early 2000s, home-based internet was becoming more popular, especially amongst the youth. It provided a gateway to not only communicate with friends, but also a window to the world beyond the small city. So Kacie signed up for Yahoo Messenger under the screen name Model Behavior 63. She talked with her real friends, such as her best friends Samantha and Jessica, but Kacie couldn't escape the lure of online chat rooms. Specifically, she went into Christian-based chat rooms for teens because it made her feel safer. And it was here she met her first online friend that wasn't from Arkansas, a young man named Dave Fagan. Dave, who used the screen name Jazzman_DT, was a 17-year-old surfer kid from San Diego, California. Dave was unlike anyone Kacie knew in person, and he really fascinated her. To a teen, Arkansas and California can seem like two different planets, so Dave was cool. The two bonded quickly over a shared love of music, specifically Elvis Presley. She even opened up to him about her mother's death, and surprisingly, Dave had a very similar situation. He claimed he had an aunt who lived in Arkansas, who was also in a car accident. However, she was currently in a coma, and the prognosis did not look good. This little bit of information only brought Kacie and Dave closer together. Kacie was so comfortable with him that she exchanged personal information, photos, and even connected him to her real-life friends, Jessica and Samantha. Unlike Kacie, though, her friends were more skeptical of Dave, especially Sam. Sam felt the way that Dave spoke was off for someone who claimed to be 17 years old. He used outdated slang like groovy or wicked. Sam warned her friend about being wary of people online, but Kacie seemed unfazed. She feared Kacie mistook infatuation for true love and explained she could not be in love with someone she didn't know. But it didn't matter. Kacie liked Dave, and their relationship briefly became more when they started an online romance. Kacie's father wasn't too concerned at first with her online activity. He felt as long as she was within his home, she was safe. But during the summer of 2002, Dave turned 18. When Kacie told her father about her friend, he told her to stop communicating with him because 18 was far too old, and Rick didn't even know who this kid was. Kacie did respect her father's wishes, but only for a brief period of time. The relationship would end between Dave and Kacie in May of 2002 when she met another boy who was closer to her own age. Her new online interest was a boy named Scott, who stated he was 14 years old and from Alpharetta, Georgia. Scott, who used the screen name Taz2999, told Kacie he really enjoyed sports and talking with her. Much like with Dave, Kacie became very close to Scott, and they started their online romance in October of 2002, just before her 13th birthday. Despite no longer being romantic with Dave, Kacie and Dave stayed very close friends. Kacie always set up phone conferences between herself, Jess, or Sam, and Dave, even though the girls were not fond of him. Dave was weird and always asked for too much information, and unlike Kacie, her friends weren't as trusting. She introduced Scott to not only Dave, but Sam and Jess as well, who were not impressed with her new beau. Kacie was very quick to provide Scott with her phone number and address after only a few weeks of knowing him. After their breakup, Kacie noticed Dave started talking about his aunt and her worsening condition more than before. Kacie was aware his aunt lived in Arkansas, but she didn't know exactly where. The girls often talked about whether Kacie would meet him if he came to visit, but she stated she had no plans of ever meeting him. By mid-November, Dave did make the trip. He called Kacie, who had Jessica staying over at the time. The girls stayed on the phone with him per his request. Oddly, while on the phone, they began hearing noises outside of the house, and grew quite scared from it. They barricaded themselves in Kacie's room when suddenly the floor in the kitchen creaked as if someone else was in the house. Both girls told Dave they were scared because they just knew someone was there, but he reassured it was nothing, and the noises just stopped. But then things took a turn on December 3rd, 2002. Kacie went to school like any other day, but today Kacie and Sam had a disagreement which resulted in a pretty big argument. Sam was always concerned about her friend, so she went to the school counselor and explained how careless she thought Kacie was being online. Kacie was brought in where her counselor attempted to warn her of the dangers associated with online interactions, but Kacie seemed to not take the warnings as seriously as she should have. Although slightly irritated with her friend's bold move, Kacie overlooked the whole thing and patched things up with Sam before the end of the day. When it was time to head home, Kacie asked to stay at Sam's house that night, but Sam knew it was a school night and her mother wouldn't allow it, so she declined. Kacie also asked 2 other friends as well who had similar reasoning before giving up and heading home. It was almost like she knew something bad was going to happen. The night of December 3rd, 2002 was cold and rainy, and everyone in the Woody home was busy. Rick had to work until 2 a.m. Tim left to go study at 6 p.m. Eric had class that evening, and Aunt Teresa was at her child's basketball game, so Kacie was home alone. It wasn't completely uncommon, and in fact Kacie felt very safe at home, that some nights she didn't even bother locking the front door. So Kacie settled in, putting on her favorite sweatpants before logging on to the computer to talk to Scott. During her chat session, Dave called Kacie very upset about his aunt. He explained she wasn't expected to live much longer, and Kacie was sharing the updates with Scott. Scott showed sympathy for Dave's situation, and in a very unlike Kacie reply, she sent a short response, then quit responding altogether. Scott received his last message from Kacie at 9:41 p.m. He continued to send her message after message, growing more and more concerned. When she hadn't reached out, Scott called the Woody home around 10:15 p.m., but no one answered. He continued to send messages, then tried to email Jessica, but it was around 10:45 p.m., and she wouldn't see it until the following day. Eric arrived home shortly after 10:17 p.m., and Kacie wasn't at the computer, so he assumed she had gone to bed. So Eric stayed up for a bit watching TV and completing some tasks. Then around 11:30 p.m., he got up and walked to the laundry room when he noticed Kacie was not in her bedroom. It was strange, but not completely unusual, since sometimes Kacie would go and stay at her friend's house. Shortly after 11:30 p.m., Tim arrived home and Eric asked him where Kacie was. Tim explained to him that he thought she was at the house. He grew concerned, so he phoned his father about 10 minutes after that. Rick, who was still at work, also thought Kacie was at home. He had last spoken to her around 7 p.m. and things were okay. It was unlike Kacie to go anywhere without calling and telling someone or even asking to leave. So Rick had Tim call Kacie's friends while he contacted the sheriff's office, because they knew something was wrong. None of Kacie's friends or their aunt had seen her. During the calls, Tim noticed a missed call from a number from Georgia. When Rick arrived home, he noticed right away that there were signs of a struggle and forced entry into the home. Kacie's coats were left draped over a chair, and her shoes left by the computer. Her eyeglasses were found misshapen and left on the couch, and the family dog had a limp. The sheriff's deputy arrived shortly after, and much like Rick, believed that the young girl was forcefully taken from the house. By 12:24 a.m., law enforcement agencies are notified of the missing child, who is believed to be a victim of abduction. During this process, Eric noticed that the chat log was still up on the computer, so he reaches out to Scott to try and gather anything about Kacie. Scott didn't know anything, but Eric was able to confirm Scott's identity and discover that Kacie had been on the phone with another friend, Dave, before she quit responding. Investigators went door to door around the area, asking for any information they may have. Volunteers also searched the woods surrounding the house, but nothing came of this. On the morning of December 4th, the media reported that Kacie Woody had been missing and possibly kidnapped. Police came to the school in order to interview Kacie's closest friends, Jess and Samantha, for any additional information they may have overlooked. Both Sam and Jess couldn't help but feel that Scott was somehow responsible. Kacie shared everything with him, so it only seemed plausible that he would know how to find her. After the interview, though, the girls realized they didn't mention Dave, so they tried to write a note to give to the detective, but unbeknownst to them, Dave was already on their radar. During the initial investigation phase, a lead was found in the wastebasket of Kacie's room. 2 wadded up pieces of paper, each one read something different. One proclaimed, "Kacie Renee Woody loves David Leslie Fagan," while the other said, "Kacie Renee Woody loves Scott G." Not much was known about either of these boys. until the search of the computer when investigators uncovered their profiles from Kacie's friends list. Through his online persona, police discovered Dave was not at all who he claimed to be. In fact, his real name was David Fuller, and he was a 47-year-old man. David looked nothing like the young surfer in his profile pictures. He was balding, very scrawny, and his life was essentially crumbling beneath him. The only factual thing other than his first name was that he lived in California. Dave was in the middle of a divorce with his second wife, with whom he had 2 children with, a son aged 11 and a daughter aged 7. Dave came from a devout Mormon family and was one of 4 children. His 3 siblings flourished in life while Dave was always a little different. He wasn't a good student, didn't practice his family's religion, and hung around bad influences. Rather than focus on education, Dave just wanted to play in bands, which is how he met his first wife. The pair married very young, with Dave only being 19, but the relationship wasn't meant to last. Dave met his second wife through his bandmate during the early 80s, and the two would marry just 3 years later. They made several moves throughout several states, including Mississippi, Maryland, Utah, and finally California. Dave found work at a car dealership for the company Saturn, and life seemed to be good until 2001. His wife had enough, and she wanted out of the marriage, stating his unpredictable temper was the source of her unhappiness. Plus, Dave wasn't exactly an open book. He hid things from her, both past and present. By 2002, Dave was only growing more distant. He had long computer sessions and went on secretive walks at night to make phone calls. And ultimately, his wife quit worrying about what he was up to. Digging more into his background, police discovered Dave had recently had some legal issues. Before divorce was filed, he was charged with a misdemeanor for exposing himself to 2 young girls. He made up some excuse to his wife, who didn't believe him. He served no time for this, but rather paid a fine, and it all just went away. In August of 2002, he had a CPS investigation opened against him when he was accused of inappropriate behavior with his daughter. But again, nothing came from this. Then, in September, he lost his job at the dealership due to a lack of productivity and for watching inappropriate content on his work computer. Then that same month, he received a charge when he forced his way into his wife's home during an argument, and the altercation escalated. But due to a lack of evidence, charges were dropped against him. After this discovery, investigators felt that with his violent background and known trips to the area, Dave had to be the guy. So on December 4th, the police agencies were asked to search their local motels for any guest with a similar name as Dave or David Fagan, or even anyone traveling from California. Within 30 minutes after the search started, it was discovered David was in fact staying at the Motel 6 in Conway, Arkansas under his real name. He checked in on December 2nd and was scheduled to be there until the 7th. Police interviewed the manager, who remembered the strange guest. He stated David became very upset when he couldn't connect to the internet from his room. When the manager told him he couldn't fix the issue, he just stormed off for the local library instead. Investigators confirmed the car parked outside of the room belonged to David. The manager also let them inside of the room to check for any evidence or maybe even Kacie. When they got inside, nothing seemed to be disturbed. His laptop was there, his suitcase still packed neatly, and the bed had not been slept in. Rather than risk possibly missing him, a team was left at the hotel for observation, while other leads were explored. One of these leads was a nearby car rental business, where again they struck gold. An employee was able to provide additional information about an odd interaction 2 days ago. A man named David came in and rented a silver Dodge Caravan on December 2nd for the week. The employee stated he acted rather strange while filling out paperwork, so the employee took down his information, which included his phone number. Investigators took the phone number and compared it to the one found in the Woody's phone records, and it was a match. This only helped solidify that Dave was their man. The description of the minivan was sent out along with David's pictures. They subpoenaed the car rental paperwork where they were able to get his credit card information and submit a request for these records as well. From the credit card records, they discovered a month ago David rented a storage unit in Conway and realized that this is probably where Kacie was being kept since the motel was far too risky. They changed their course and headed out hoping Kacie would be found safe and unharmed. They arrived at the storage unit around 5 p.m. where they made contact with the owners who led them to the correct unit. The door was unlocked but closed shut, so investigators assumed he may have fled in a hurry. But when they opened the door, to their surprise, the minivan sat there, with the engine still running. As the lead investigator stepped inside, a gunshot rang out inside of the unit. For safety reasons, they did call backup, and police tried to coax David out of the unit, but they got no response. By 8:30 p.m., they were cleared to enter the unit where, at the back, sitting against the wall, facing the trunk of the van, was the body of David Fuller. David had shot himself, and straight across from him, bound in the back of the van, was the body of Kacie Woody. David was identified by his license. At the scene, they also found half a bottle of chloroform and a rag next to Kacie's head. Reportedly, David had snatched Kacie on December 3rd and went directly to the storage unit, where he hid out until police arrived, since the security box at the storage facility showed David arriving at 10:15 p.m. It was determined he left the unit for a total of 20 minutes on December 4th, when he left shortly after 7 a.m. to go to the nearby store, before returning right back to the unit. Police believe David was waiting and buying his time until nightfall so he could flee on foot. From Kacie's autopsy, it was discovered that she died from a gunshot wound and she had been assaulted. Coroners could not pinpoint her time of death due to the chloroform, but it was determined she was likely passed out from the moment he kidnapped her until she died. After the discovery, David's apartment and computers were searched. Investigators were hoping to find any information that may point to other victims. During the search, they did discover that his trip to Arkansas in November was not his first. He'd made a weekend trip sometime in October where police believed he treated it as a scouting trip to learn more about Kacie and her family's routines. Also in his apartment, they found a montage of photos of Kacie next to his home computer, along with pictures of her friends Jessica and Sam. His friends list on Messenger revealed a long list of kids from all over the country. David had been a regular participant in the teen chat rooms for roughly 2 years and was in the process of grooming 3 other girls around the same age as Kacie. Police also submitted his DNA to see if he was connected to any other unsolved crimes, but nothing came back. The community was very distraught over the loss of Kacie. Her classmates had a hard time overcoming what happened. Kacie was laid to rest on December 8, 2002 at the Crossroads Cemetery in Arkansas. During her wake, her friends brought her yellow roses, which were her favorite flower, and handwritten notes addressed directly to Kacie. As a result of Kacie's death, Rick Woody put together a nonprofit organization called the Kacie Woody Foundation, which is dedicated to sharing Kacie's story and help educate on the importance of internet safety in order to protect future children from falling victims to other online monsters. I mentioned earlier Kacie loved poetry, so I wanted to share her poem, I Am an Angel, that was published by the Society of Young Poets. It was listed on the Kacie Woody website. Quote, I am an angel sent from above to spread the world with lots of love. I spread my joy to the most wonderful boy, to one day find that this perfect boy will be mine. I love this boy with all my heart. I should have told him from the start about the love I hope to find with this boy who will be mine. End quote. I know the children cases are tough to watch, but I just want to remind that it's important to learn and know the signs so we can continue to grow as a society and learn from the errors of the past. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, so please share them in the comments down below and we can chat about it. Thank you again to Somebody's Grandma for sharing this case, and I did want to remind you all that if you have a case that you want to share with the community, I do prefer my email or inbox on social media, because sometimes the comments can get lost. I do my best to make note of every single one, but I just wanted you guys to know that I don't take your participation for granted. So thank you to all of those who have suggested something, and I promise I'm working on them, so don't think I've forgotten about you. But if you found this to be informative, consider giving it a thumbs up to let YouTube know you want more. And if you're not subscribed yet, you should, because we would love to have you under the ash tree. Thank you all to my amazing friends for making it this far. You are so very appreciated. Thank you for making my week, and I hope you have a great one as well. As always, I will see you in the next one. Bye, friends.